Hello everyone, my name is D3 Damage and MoML. I'm the GOAT of Open, and I'm here to bring you How to Open Part 2, Calculators 101. One of the things I will say is that calculators are the soul of Open, right? Part of what makes Open more fun for me than my grade experience has been that there is a hard cap. I need to think very carefully about what I do. You can't just slam home bigger numbers and more skills and then say, I have better numbers than you, I'm going to win. You have to be very careful and thoughtful about how things interact together. And part of that involves knowing how to use a calculator. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about all the components that go into that. First and foremost, what those components actually are of the calculator, how to understand those components, the kind of general cost of going for stats versus going for skills, and then there is going to be a part two to part two, a 2.5, if you will. That's going to talk a little bit more about how to reasonably prepare strong UMA for Open. But for now, let's go on to the components, or really how to find a calculator in the first place. So there are a lot. There are a lot of calculators. I know some people are like, man, I don't know if I'll be able to find one. I don't want to have to translate Japanese. You don't. You don't have to. All right. That hasn't been the case for well over a year at this point, right? It's been a very long time since you had to use a calculator in Japanese, right? People figured out very fast that they could just make a calculator and make it work for themselves. And there are a lot of variations of them now. Go into Google and find your favorite. There are a bunch of different ones, and they all have their own strengths. But I'm going to recommend two just for brevity's sake. One, I personally use an outdated one, right, that is no longer being maintained, but is hosted on Google Spreadsheets. The reason I use that particular one is because it also has the math on there. And it's a bunch of easy drop downs, so it's really easy to just kind of mix and match things as I please. And so because I do so much min-maxing, it's a much easier calculator to use. But if you're kind of smooth brain and you just want to kind of have someone fill in the details for you, there is one for UmaTools skill optimizer and rating calculator that is very, very smooth brain. It's not as flexible, but it does fill in a lot of the other information that you might need, like whether your Excel's already good, if you want a support hints, it helps calculate odds. It's a very, very powerful tool. And so if you're really, really nervous about doing Open for the first time and you're like, man, I want to get good at this, but I don't want to invest too much effort, I recommend the UmaTools one. Now, why do I use the spreadsheet personally? It's just a little layout, honestly. Like, there's no other reason. I can easily alter the output of stats. I can change the type of skill very easily. Like, everything's a drop down, which makes everything so fast, right? Also, I'm kind of used to Google Spreadsheets, right? I went to college and I spent a lot of time messing with spreadsheets, so messing with this is pretty fun and pretty easy to do. I have no problems doing it. But if you're not super math brained and not spreadsheet pilled, then like I said, UmaTools is pretty good. That being said, there is one downside. Because it's no longer being updated, and I can't be bothered to do the things myself, you will need to borrow, if you use the same spreadsheet one that I'm using currently, you will need to go out of your way to calculate the value of some of those extra stats. Not every calculator has been updated, so you do need to be careful about that, because some calculators won't tell you the extra cost of the different new stat caps. But it's pretty easy to do the math yourself, right? You can, if you're really not math brain and you want to just do like the simple version, you can kind of just go into a different calculator that does allow the conversion and just say, okay, well, if that much speed is worth that much and that much speed is worth that much, if I calculate the difference, okay, well now I know what my actual limit is in points toss, right? Easy peasy, right? But let's say, I don't know, hypothetically, what about the stills though? So the stills a little bit harder. So, with the still, when it comes to the stills that are brand new to the game and haven't been added into anyone's list yet, they aren't in a lot of the calculators. Okay, let's get that out of the way. And you might go, okay, well, are there any calculators that we can use? No. So here's what you gotta do instead. You're gonna have to do the work yourself. All right. But it's pretty easy. Basically, what you look for is you look for any skills that do the same thing as the magical skill. For example, Latch On is a target speed increaser for around 2.4 seconds. And if I compare it to other target speed increases that are also Pace Chaser specific, it ends up costing, well, 239, no matter what skill I pick. So you can pretty safely assume that at least this skill will cost 239. And that seems to be hold true for most like multi-class or multi-distance stills, whichever one is more expensive is the cost that tends to be accurate in the calculator. So that's what I would generally roll with. Just double check the cost of some other still that does the same thing, and just go with it, whichever one you find that's the most expensive. That's just generally won't lead you wrong. So far, none of these hybrid stills and none of the brand new stills are more expensive than what's already in the calculator. So far. Now I have a proverb for you. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. Her being your perfect Uma. That perfect Uma being the Uma that hits 14,499. Yes, while you cannot win the game by just having bigger numbers than everyone else, it is true that you do want to get as close and use as much of that 14,500 value as you can, without actually going over. Obviously, the microsecond you go over, you're now in S rank, and now you're no longer viable for open. But as a rule, if two people are very well built and one of them just has a 30 or 60 point advantage, you would expect that person with 30 or 60 point advantage to win most of the time. Kind of. I say kind of because, all right. I know what, if you're probably coming from graded, right? You're probably going to look at these two and go, okay, well, this one on the right has a bigger number, so she wins, right? Wait a minute, no, this is a Guri cap, right? Tristan's Guri wins, right? No. Right, I'm going to tell you the truth right now, neither of these is particularly, amazing. And we're going to have a conversation about what makes Tristan's Guri bad later. But we'll have a conversation about what makes this, bourbon kind of interesting now. Alright? What you need to understand, right, is that when I look at this Guri cap, when I look at this bourbon, you are not ingraded anymore. Neither of these is a solo ace. They're part of a team. Alright? I need you to just hold your horses, alright? No amount of good skills and good stats is going to compensate for your team being bad. When you're making multiple Uma, make them for a purpose. Try and figure out how they overlap together. For example, this is a frontrunner Criticism Guri whose main goal is to proc Angling and Scheming, and sometimes use Radiant Star to get a good mid-race skill, right? This bourbon's main job is to not die, right? She has 939 stamina with an extra chunk of 564 guts. She is not going to lose out on stamina on any random medium track, all right? As long as she doesn't require a blue still, she'll be just fine. And that's kind of the point. And I didn't end up using her. So for the last CM, for the Cancer Cup CM, right, I had a very good win rate, but the Uma on the left is the bourbon I just showed you, and the Uma on the right is the one I actually ended up running. Why? Well, again, you need to understand. The way that you win in open is not just by having bigger numbers, it's by thinking very carefully about what numbers you have and where they go and why you have them there. You'll notice on the right I have more mid-race stills compared to the one on the left. Why is that? Well, because I wanted a stronger mid-race because I realized that if I was going to use OG bourbon, I needed to stay ahead of any other random frontrunners I ran into. Very notably, Valentine Bourbon and Summer Ramada Zensti. In order to do that, I just need more mid-race. That's just the way that it works. Now, because she has taken the lead, I can burn more time on other stuff instead. Alright? So that's what I need you to understand. Again, it's not good enough to just be a higher number, right? The one on the right has a lower number of 14,316 instead of the 14,490, but she's better built for the purpose I need her to fill. So she's the Uma I actually ran with. Again, I'm going to say it as often as I have to. I'm going to repeat it until you have it burned into your skull. This is not graded. You need a team. You cannot run a solo ace. One of the things I ran into a lot is that people will really get really hyped up on a Guri cap because in graded, you could absolutely run a solo Crystal Guri cap with a double debuffer and get a 90% win rate. You're not in graded. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. In open, that'll get you a 60 to 70% win rate, which that's not bad. That gets you into Group A, but it's not stellar either. There's a lot better things you can do. All right. Now, to help guide you on that path of understanding, one, how you can do better things, and two, why Crystal Guri cap's not that good, we gotta talk about what the components of your store are. The largest component by a really wide margin is your stats. Your stats form the lion's share of your cost. After your stats, it's going to be your skill counts and your skill store. After that, it's going to be your unique level store, and then it's kind of aptitudes. Aptitudes may or may not have an effect on your store at all, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But for now, let's focus up on stats. So again, I like my little Excel spreadsheet because if I need to do the math and I have to do the math, it shows me how, right? It tells me all the little bits and bobs I need to know. And for those of you who are a little bit nerdier and love seeing the math on stuff, right? I'm going to leave this up here for you, right? That way you can make the decisions yourself on if you want to use calculators like this or not. But also so you understand the general pattern. The general pattern is stats are expensive. And whenever you go over 1,200, they get prohibitively expensive, alright? It gets very expensive very fast. Just glancing at this, you'll probably see that of our 14,400 something cap, right? About 11 grand is taken up just by our stat line, right? It is astonishing how many points can go into just pumping your stats, right? Now let's pretend we had a graded stat line, right? So, by the way, this is no longer even a good graded stat line. This is now a bad graded stat line because of like the raised stat caps that happened in Unity Cup, right? Like you expect to be much faster than this, right? With a much higher wit and higher power, right? That type of stat line is already an A plus, which it's a little wild, isn't it? All right, no stills, a level 5 ult. That's it. And it's already 14,492. This is not a winning stat line. It just is missing all the skills it needs to be a winning stat line. This is rough stuff, yo. So what do? Well, you gotta take skills. And skills, as you can imagine, right, are really, really important. Roughly speaking, if we were to look at this Uma versus this Uma, right, so the one with the really big stat numbers versus the one that has all the skills, the one with all the skills is gonna win. Right, that didn't used to be the case. We'll talk more about that later. But in the current iteration of Open, where it's capped at A+, so 14,499, it is very, very important that you have a wide array of skills. And yes, this is a very, very strong Crystals of Endurance cap. In fact, it is, to date, the strongest Crystals of Endurance cap that currently exists in medium open tracks. You might go, what the fuck are you talking about? This is terrible. She's got Radiant Star, she's got 777, she's got Moxie, she's got Rishon Cow, and now we're going to talk a little bit about, like, why that's the even though stats form the lion's share of the cost, your skills are cheaper than the stat line, but they have more to do with how you win and why, right? Now, every single Uma's win condition is to get a good acceleration off right at the start of the late race, be in a good position, and then carry that good position all the way to a win at the finish line, right? That's every Uma. Crystal Zaguri is a C-rated Uma in Open because it is very difficult to have enough spare points to reasonably have a good position most of the time on your track. How? What's going on? Well, the cost of your ult is like 680 because you'll probably have a level 3 or level 4 ult, right? Probably. And that means plus the cost of the minimum required skills. Yes, 4 is the minimum requirement. I'll talk more about that in a moment. You're looking at like almost 2 grand in points. 2 grand, and then the rest of this 3,900 goes directly into like mid-race velocity skills or other things to help you push forward, right? And I can hear you. I can hear a couple of you. You're going, wait, hold on. I don't need that many. Like, if the goal is to save on points and have more mid-race, right, or just have a better mid-race, surely I just drop Radiant Star, right? Surely I just run with only 3 recovery skills. That's good enough, right? No, it's not, right? Because here's part of the problem. The problem is, if you're only running 3 of those, right, you need to have max wit. Why? Because you want to make sure you are rolling your bloody ultimate. Because if you don't roll your ultimate, you're running a terrible Uma, right? Your stat line is garbage, right? You don't have enough stamina. You don't have enough guts on most tracks, right? Or you have too much because you're building in all these recoveries. So there's this really unfortunate position for a Endurance Cap where you're either scamming out really hard on stamina and guts, and so you just don't finish the race if you don't roll into your ultimate, or You have too much because you're spending so much time trying to catch up to your ultimate and trying to make sure your ultimate happens. So a lot of it just ends up having to go into wit. And because you have 3,841 points just into wit, you're gonna run out of store incredibly fast, right? And for most other Uma can get away unironically with like 350 wit. That's not a joke. In open, it's very real. You will see a lot of builds that are rocking somewhere between 350 to 700 wit, right? Because a lot of times that's good enough, because they're just looking to proc a bunch of skills, but they're not really hardwired in on any specific skills. They don't have to have skills proc in order to function. But Chris is agree if she runs that 600 wit, she's looking at like a 40% chance that her skills just don't work at all. So she needs to be pumping wit. But if you notice, that shit get expensive real fast, yo! The cost from 600 wit to 1,000 wit does not double your value. You suddenly don't double your value in recoveries, but the actual store cost more than doubles. And you add another 1,200 points just to go to 1,200. This stuff is expensive, exceedingly expensive. And I want you to think about this. Think about that first Mihodo bourbon I made, right? Think about that bourbon right there, right? I want you to imagine that you are now short by 3,000 points in terms of skills. I've talked about it already. A raw stat line does not win open. You need your skills to proc in order to do anything. It's fine if you have bigger numbers than the people, but if they have more skills, they have a very good chance of just beating you. Right? I know you've had it happen in careers, right? Where you have like 600 speed and like 500 power and like 900 wit, and then you get freaking folded by some 300 stat Uma that has just a bunch of like random skills going on, right? It happens to you, right? Well, now imagine that it's not some random garbage Uma. They have pretty close stats to you. They also have that 1,200 speed that you have. They also have that 900 power that you have. And then on top of the same good stats, they just have more skills. Oh man, you're in trouble, right? You're in a hell of a lot of trouble, right? And that's part of why Crystal Zaguri is often routinely quite bad in open, right? Because of all these layers of problems of just like the cost involved, and then you still don't have room for skills, and these skills are super important to making sure that you actually stay ahead and stay in the correct position, and you don't just fall behind down to like 9th place by the time the actual late race starts. It's really rough in these streets for Crystal Zaguri, yo. She has a lot of stuff that she has to fight through. And even then, you'll notice that of my 4 recoveries that I take to make sure that I can run that lower wit, right? Of those, 2 of them are actually velocity skills, right? Because Radiant Star is mostly a velocity skill. It happens to have acceleration and recovery sometimes. And Operation Cacao is almost exclusively a velocity skill that happens to have a tiny micro slop of like recovery, right? And those wasted points that you have to burn into making her are kind of what makes her bad. And it's just a small demonstration of like why skills matter a lot in open. Speaking of skills, let's go on to unique skills, alright? So when it comes to unique skills, there's a couple things I need you to understand, right? You've probably heard advice that you want to stay at a 2-star Uma where possible and have as low a unique level as possible. And that's kind of true and kind of not. During Open's early days, when Open was B rating only, that was also only kind of true, right? It's kind of rough, right? The people who got that information were basically working with outdated info because, again, I've said it in other videos, there is no one, by the way, you should go watch the video number 1 if you haven't done so already. There are other videos that I've made talking about how important hitting 3 stars is, alright? But for now, I'm going to walk you through it. So one, the difference in cost is only about 50 points between being a 2-star Uma and a 3-star Uma, right? Most of your cost actually goes into unique skill level, right? And it doesn't really matter what your unique star level is, whether you're 3, 4, or 5-star. The only thing that changes in cost is, okay, well, what's the actual level of unique? So going from 3 to 6 is a big deal, right? 2 to 3, again, has a cost. Going from 3 to 6 only has an influence on if you're a unique skill level, not on any unique Uma star level, alright? So keep that in mind. That's important because, well, you can only pass stuff on if you're 3-star, right? So if you're looking at a 2-star Uma, she has, like let's say Dara Scholar, right? She has good target speed, she has good excel. This is a reasonable ult, right? At level 2, right? With a unique level 1. But if you level her up, it goes up a lot in power. It's not just a cosmetic, right? You don't just get a fancy new dress. The ult skill itself, one of the entire reasons you're playing this Uma, also gets a lot stronger. It definitely goes up in value by about 50 points, right? Would you pay 50 points if you could get a 10% velocity skill that also gives you 10% excel? Yes, yes, you would. You would absolutely pay 50 points for that, right? And so it's like, well, why wouldn't I just buy Red Splendid and Red Ace and just get the better version of the ult? You would. You absolutely would. And on top of that, like the extra stats just help you make easier runs and make your runs more consistent. So even back in the day when you were hard capped at B, you would rather have a 3-star Mama. Not to mention a Mama. I said that word already, right? What you need to think about too is that a 2-star Uma can't pass on her ultimate, right? So if you're using a 2-star, she just has less skills because she's a B-rated Uma, and she can't even pass on her ult. So it just makes for terrible parents. If you, because a lot of your runs are going to be ace runs, right? It doesn't matter whether you're in open or in graded, like you're doing a lot of ace runs. And so if your ace runs just can't be Mamas, that's really rough for your long-term health of your grouping, right? So it tends to be better to just, well, level up your girl and get her up to 3-star. Just make sure you have the unique star level, right? Also, it's worth noting, you're running Trackblazer. Yes, I know Unity Cup got buff. Yes, I know URI Finale got buff. I've tried them out both out. I do think there's actually a good use case for saying URI Finale is pretty good. I do think it is good. Unity Cup, though, the stat gain is too much, right? You just get too big numbers. And so if you use Unity Cup, you will end up with Umas like this one, right? Where they have a ton of great stats. But you might actually end up going over on stats, and you'll still have no skills. And so what'll end up happening is that you just lose, despite having the biggest numbers in the lobby, right? So one of the best things that you can do is just play Trackblazer instead. Trackblazer is really easy for open. It's incredibly consistent. All you really need to do is make sure that you avoid Aizawa, right? As long as you avoid the Director, then what'll happen is that you'll have like a level 2, level 3, maybe a level 4, even level 5 ult. That's all fine. I'm not kidding. As long as you're level 5 or less on your ultimate, it's completely okay. Because what you want to think about is that in Trackblazer, you're kind of trading an ult level for more skill points, right? Again, we've talked about already, skill points matter, right? Making sure you have enough skill points to actually buy all the skills you want is a really big deal, right? And so because it's a really big deal, it's routinely better to just send the races and eat the ult as like a tax, right? Like, yes, it is more expensive without that much more value, right? Like, yes, the cost from bringing a level 3 to level 6 ultimate is a lot, right? The jump does matter. But it's not like you don't get anything. You do get something for the process, right? It's not a lot, it's very, very little, but that's good enough, right? Especially when the upside is that you get to have all of your other skills. And that is a very, very real upside. And hey, depending on the Uma, it might not even be that bad, right? Very notably, any acceleration Uma like Mount Zensty or Tanky Shuttle just has bigger numbers, and so bigger numbers like these multiplications a little bit more. Super Creek in particular, on any very long CM, loves having a bonus to her ultimate. It's just such a big number whenever you level up her ult. That's actually completely fine, and just acts as more recovery, which is great. Now, let's talk about the run ender. So, I saved the aptitudes for last, because they are probably the least important part of your cost. Most of the time, they won't matter. Most of the time, you just don't need to care about them. But sometimes they will matter. And I can guarantee you, as a rite of passage, at least once, you're going to forget to work on your aptitude, and you're going to fuck up your score, and it's going to piss you off, because there was a viable Uma that you just accidentally made an S rank. Or you were like, shit, I had like another 300 points I could have played with. What the hell happened? And then you look at your aptitudes, and you're like, oh, I didn't change my aptitudes. So let's talk about that a little bit. First off, I get this question a lot. How good is S rank in turf or track type, and S rank in distance in open Uma? Fun fact, it didn't used to be very good. For a long time, the stats you would gain off of green stills was actually better than having an extra 10% to whatever stat, right? The reason was pretty straightforward. It turns out 60 is a pretty good number, and if you get 2 of a skill, so 2 speed skills, that was 120 extra stats. It was a lot easier to get 120 extra stats than getting Sprint S or Long S or whatever, right? It was very easy to do so. And so what S does is gives you 10% of the stat, right, or 10% bonus. So if your speed in B rank was like 800 and you got 10% bonus, you got 880. Versus if you had 800 base speed and got another 120 in speed from your green skills, well, congratulations, you were just faster than someone who had S rank. It was very funny. It was very, very funny. It's actually only recently that you actually got more benefit off of having S rank in your stats. And that's specifically when we switched to A+. When we switched to A+, finally you could hit that speed and power cap because it was finally, well, you had enough room that the expense of those stats didn't lock you out, right? So now you can finally reasonably go for S ranks and actually be very happy with it, right? At this point, if you have either double greens for speed or power, or the S rank in turf / dirt / distance, right? They're about the same, right? They're no longer very clearly weighted in one way or the other. Now, obviously, ideally, you have both. That is still true, but you don't need it. Most of the time, you'll only need one or the other. So don't fret if you don't get the full wombo combo. You'll probably be okay, right? Again, you gotta remember that people gotta pay for these things, right? Well, kind of. We'll talk about that right now, actually. So, fun fact: if you just look at the stat line, so let's pretend there's a stat line here, and it's the exact same stat line over here. There's actually no cost difference, despite, well, one of them having turf A and one of them having turf G. That's that's kind of nice, isn't it? But I already mentioned it, right? How aptitude can have some fucky wuckies, right? Where like sometimes your score will just be different, right? Like you'll put in mile S because you and mile S and A are the same, right? There's no cost difference between mile S and mile A, and so you plug into the store and there's just no change in store until what the fuck? Why are these stores different? I'm gonna let you know now. While you can't see the stat line for these, they are the exact same, right? I'm gonna make sure you get that out of your head. This one and this one have the exact same stat line with the exact same skills. So why is this one cheaper? Well, you look around and you realize, oh, wait a minute, hold on. I put my medium aptitude as A, but it's actually B. Wait, why does that matter? Hold on. Why do we care? I thought we just established that, like, wait, what? What? Some of you will go, wait, hold on, I thought the aptitude doesn't matter. And then you test it, and you go, okay, well, if I put everything on A, okay, that's that score. Now if I put everything on G, it should be different. No, it's not different. What the hell's going on? How come the aptitude doesn't matter? But sometimes when you change an aptitude, your store changes. What's happening? Well, it's because some skills are conditional on what your affinities are. It's not most skills, and frankly, a lot of the times, you are running your girl in her preferred aptitudes. You're running your Late Surger King Kalo. You're running your Pace Chaser Fuji Kaseki. So most of the time, it won't matter. They just have Pace A, so they'll just have the cost that's listed here. It's gonna be fine. But it turns out that, yes, this is the cost that matters. This is why aptitude sometimes screws you. Because if you forget to change your aptitude, sometimes you'll forget, oh, I'm not running a Pace Chaser anymore, I'm running a Late Surger. And so your costs are just different. Because your old affinity stat line has the wrong affinities, and so that changes the cost of your skills. And that can lead to some awkward situations. Again, I need to let you know now, it is a rite of passage to forget that you're actually an A rank in late now, because you just happen to get a pink spark roll on your Late Surger Monozensky, and you happen to get 3 of those sparks, and so you went from being a C rank end Late Surger to an S rank Late Surger, and suddenly you're over on budget, and you just had no idea, and you already purchased all your stuff, and so you turn that beautiful, beautiful Late Surger and Monozensky to an S rank Ryuma that is now unviable for graded and for open. That's rough, buddy. Now, that being said, it's not all downside. Because you know this is a feature, sometimes you can use this to, like, scam out a little bit and cause some savings. You can make the skills cheaper. Because you can make the skills cheaper, you can get more of them. So that's just upside, right? No. It is not just upside. What I need you to understand is that there's some affinities you cannot touch, okay? One, if you are on a turf or dirt track, your turf or dirt affinity must be A. Whatever the track is, you must be A. Is the distance a sprint, mile, medium, long? You must have at least A. S is better, obviously, but A is required. You cannot scam out on your affinities for the track. It's just not possible. Why? Well, because if you have less power than everyone else, that means you have less acceleration, which means you lose. If you have if your distance affinity is wrong, so if you're medium A instead, or sorry, medium B instead of medium S, well, now your max speed is cucked. Because your max speed is cucked, you lose. All right. So always, always, always make sure that you are at least A rank in whatever distance and track type you're running. I'm saving you a lot of heartache. And even for the affinity for what running style you have, it's important to remember that there's more to wit than just skill activation. There are other things that are going on too. Notably, you gotta think about your resistance to being rushed, your chance to increase your target speed, your stamina consumption, and your position keeping. That is all linked to wit. If your running style is too low, well then now your wit is screwed. If you have a G or through D, so 40% or worse debuff to your wit, you're going to be failing a lot of checks. And before you ask, yes, it is possible to rush multiple times in a single race. I've definitely had it happen. It's a little rough. Now, that being said, B or C is actually okay, right? When you start hitting, like, we've kind of talked about it already, you get a lot of value on wits just from being at least 350 wit. So if you can hit 600 or more consistently, then you can frankly just not care. You'll probably have enough wit to still proc things most of the time. And it's still okay, right? It's completely fine to be, like, late Surge or end closer C. It is. It really is. Now, obviously, S is better, but it's not the end of the world if you don't have the S rank in like, your whatever affinity you have for running style. And sometimes, notably, it's even a buff, right? Like, if you get rushed, that is a velocity buff, right? And if you get rushed and have enough stamina, it literally is just a velocity buff. Congratulations, you got it for free, right? And so for something like Endless Monozensky, who, by the way, she also has a 20% wit growth, so she's just going to have a higher wit on accident a lot of the time anyways. So, like, the downsides of being a C rating for her are just not that big. And it sometimes even helps you, right? Because, like, look at this track, for example, right? On the current Leo Cup sprint track, the final corner is actually pretty early into the race, or into the mid-race, rather. And so if you just have her as a front runner, she just procs her ult too early, and then nothing happens. But if she's a late surger or end closer, you have a very real odds of proccing her ult at a better time. It's a lot closer to the end of the start of the late race, or even exactly the start of the late race. And then you feel incredible watching her zoom. It's very, very fun. I do recommend you try it at least once if you can. Now, we're gonna start talking about how to make your Uma good. And I need everyone to understand something. Back when Open was a B rated, a lot of the time it was correct to have a better stat line with fewer skills. Alright? That is just the way the game worked. Alright? Now, not all the time. A good rule of thumb was the shorter the track, the more skills matter. The longer the track, the more you want stats. That's the way it used to work. However, we are no longer in that meta. Alright? It turns out that most of the time, if you have more skills, you are going to win more often as long as your stat line is also reasonable and also good. Now, take that with a grain of salt. On the left side, I'm showing off an Uma that, like, beat me, but this was day 2 of round 2, and you'll look at the win rate, you'll notice, while it did beat me in particular, I was their 9th win, they still weren't doing so hot compared to me, right? Like, what you gotta understand is that, like, I think Side Games has done this on purpose, where they really want Open Uma to, like, take cards more often, because if it was just about stat lines, what you would probably do is you would just take whatever the best cards are for graded and just not buy stills, and that would be good enough, right? But they really want you to just be more consistent and buy more stuff, right? So because they want you to buy more stuff, they gotta have more cards that are viable for you. And a lot of viability in Open comes down to what skills and hints a card gives you, not necessarily what stat line it gives you. So the actual, like, meta of cards is different. And if you ask, no, I'm not salty that this one beat me. How dare. Now, I do want to talk a lot more about how you generate a target and how you know what target stat line, target skills to hit, but that's going to be for another video. Why? Because this one's already like half an hour long, and I have spent way too long producing it. It got delayed several times because I was focusing too hard on trying to tell people how to make a target Uma, and then eventually I realized, hold on, I just need to make that another video. This video is, again, just about the calculator, just what the components are, and what the logic for why you care about some components more than others. Again, order operations, you care a lot about your stats because they're expensive. You care about your skills because that's how you win. You care about your ults mostly as a tangential thing. You just don't want to be level 6. Anything else is fine. And then for your aptitudes, you just need to make sure you double check your aptitudes. Always make sure you have the correct aptitudes before you lock in any purchases of skills, and then you'll be fine. Next time on our open guides, how to cook part 2.5, then we're going to talk a little bit more about stats versus skills, what skills to take, and what cards make sense to help you build target Umas that'll help you win more races. Till then, ta-ta, good luck.